Was I bitten by a dog, but a vicious female customer also splashed a glass of ice water directly into my face. I couldn't even afford rent and was kicked out by my landlord. But the next second, a heavy helicopter landed right on the highway. Over a dozen bodyguards in black suits bowed 90 degrees to me, calling me young master. As it turned out, this all happened simply because I was kind-hearted enough to give half a steamed bun to an old scavenger. Who would have thought he was actually a hidden billionaire worth tens of billions? Right before he died, he left his entire inheritance to me, instantly turning me into a billionaire. Right now, under the overpass, I was squatting on the concrete steps, stuffing a cold steamed bun into my mouth. I had shamelessly swiped it from a breakfast stall owner this morning after he left it out to be thrown away, and I managed to take 2 bites. It was hard and freezing, choking my throat with pain as I swallowed hard. A drop of rainwater leaked through the overpass gap and landed perfectly on the back of my neck, making me shiver from the freezing cold. My delivery uniform was completely soaked, clinging tightly to my body. A violent coughing fit erupted from right beside me. I turned my head and saw Grandpa Goo huddled by the bridge pier, his back hunched, coughing so hard his entire body shook. The old man wore a military coat covered in countless patches, and rainwater dripped steadily down his gray hair. I frowned and pointed out that he hadn't taken his medicine again. Grandpa Goo waved his hand, taking a long time to recover his breath before telling me he was fine, claiming it was just an old problem. I looked at the half-bitten bun in my hand, then at the old man's purple freezing lips. Without hesitation, I handed the bun over and told him to eat it, adding that there was still half left. He hesitated, pointing out that I didn't even have enough for myself. I lied without blushing, telling him I had just eaten one and was already full. I added that I wouldn't be cold once I started running. Suddenly, my phone vibrated violently. I pulled out the device with its half-shattered screen, and the order notification rang out frantically. It was a new order heading to the 28th floor of the Yunding penthouse. The note explicitly stated it had to be hot, warning that they would reject it and leave a bad review if it got cold. The estimated delivery time was 35 minutes. My heart sank at the mention of Yunding Penthouse. That was the most upscale residential area in the east of the city. Just arguing with the security guards at the gate would take up a massive amount of time. To make matters worse, There was a penalty warning next to the order amount, a full deduction plus a $50 fine for a timeout. I had already been fined 3 times this month. If I got fined again, I would have worked the whole month for absolutely nothing. I told the old man I had to go and promised to come back to see him tonight. Without another word, I straddled my chipped electric bike, twisted the throttle, and charged straight into the rainstorm. The rain was so heavy it felt like water was being poured directly over my head. I navigated through the traffic with my eyes narrowed. After picking up the food from the restaurant, I checked the time to see I only had 22 minutes left. It was going to be tough, but I had to give it everything I had. I held the delivery box tightly in my arms, terrified the rainwater would seep into it. 14 minutes later, I arrived at Yunding Penthouse. A uniformed security guard stood at the main gate, his expression turning to sheer disgust, as if he had just smelled something foul the moment he saw my beat-up electric bike. He aggressively demanded to know what I was doing. Told him I was delivering food to the 28th floor and flashed the order on my phone. The guard looked me up and down and ordered me to use the side gate. When I asked where the side gate was, he jerked his chin to the right, telling me it was about 500 meters around the corner. I frantically checked the time and saw I only had 8 minutes left. I pleaded with him, calling him brother, explaining that the main gate would only take 3 minutes and that I was in a desperate rush. He didn't even blink as he stated that the main gate did not accept deliveries, insisting it was the rules. I gritted my teeth, turned my bike around, and sped toward the side gate. I ran into a construction barrier halfway and had to literally carry my bike over it. When I finally reached the side gate, another guard stopped me to register. This back and forth completely wasted 4 minutes. By the time I rushed into the building, I only had 4 minutes left. An under maintenance sign hung on the freight elevator doors. Left with no choice, I pressed the button for the passenger elevator. As soon as the doors opened, a woman in high heels frowned and stepped back, asking if I couldn't read and stating that delivery workers weren't allowed in the passenger elevator. Sure enough, there was a notice plastered right on the wall next to it. 4 minutes. 28 floors. I didn't hesitate for a single second.
Saya jenuh dengan meja rias saya yang berantakan setiap hari. Saya bertanya kepada ChatGPT, bagaimana agar meja rias saya terlihat lebih indah. Dan akhirnya, meja aku
Second. I turned around, pushed open the door to the fire escape stairs, and ran up with all my might. 1 floor, 2 floors. My knees smashed heavily against the steps, but I didn't stop. I struggled to get up and continued climbing with a severe limp. 20 floors, 26 floors. My lungs felt like they were filled with fire, and every breath I took tasted like iron rust in my throat. Floor 28. I crashed through the door and collapsed onto the hallway carpet, stumbling and crawling. I glanced at my phone. 1 minute and 3 seconds left. I forced myself to stand up and rang the doorbell for room 2801. Ding dong. A man's impatient complaint immediately echoed from inside, grumbling that I had finally arrived and that he had been waiting for half a century. Right after, a woman giggled coquettishly, telling him not to be mad, and suggesting they just make me kneel down and apologize later. My knuckles turned white as I clutched the takeout bag. I took a deep breath, forcefully suppressing my emotions. For the sake of this month's salary, I had to endure it. The door lock clicked, and the door cracked open. However, it wasn't a person that rushed out. A Dogo Argentino, half the height of a human, squeezed its way out through the gap. It opened its jaws to reveal a full row of sharp teeth. Its vicious eyes locked dead onto me. My pupils contracted violently. The very next second, the dog kicked off its hind legs, its 70-pound body launching like a cannonball straight at my face. Its fangs nearly bit my face. I instinctively dodged sideways, using the takeout bag to shield my chest. The dog missed, landed, and immediately changed direction, sinking its teeth viciously into my left calf on the second strike. Its teeth instantly pierced through my pants and deep into my flesh. I let out a muffled groan. An intense, explosive pain shot up from my calf. Red stains constantly seeped from the wound, instantly ruining a patch of the carpet. The Dogo clamped down and absolutely refused to let go, thrashing its head wildly, clearly intent on severely injuring my leg. One of my hands desperately protected the delivery box, while my other hand instinctively wanted to strike the dog, but I forced myself to hold back. If I injured a customer's dog, the platform would undoubtedly ban me outright. Gritting my teeth, I could only use my knee to push against the dog's head, trying desperately to shove it away. Piercing laughter erupted from inside the door. Zhao Kai, dressed in a silk bathrobe, leaned leisurely against the doorframe as if watching a comical performance. Behind him, a woman wearing heavy makeup was holding up her phone, recording the entire scene. She giggled and told Brother Kai that I was so funny and looked exactly like a clown. Zhao Kai clicked his tongue and called out, telling Bone to come back. Only then did the dog release its grip and run back to Zhao Kai's feet. Deep tooth marks were left on my left calf, the pain piercing straight to the bone. My pant leg was completely soaked in blood. I endured the agonizing pain, stood up straight, and offered the takeout forward. I started to politely offer him his meal. Before I could even finish speaking, Zhao Kai abruptly raised his foot and kicked squarely at the bottom of the takeout bag. The food containers flipped over, and boiling hot tomato soup instantly splashed all over my face. It burned with a fiery, stinging pain. Zhao Kai frowned, muttered that it was dirty, and took a step back. I wiped the soup off my face and pointed at my injured leg, stating firmly that his dog bit me and he had to pay for my medical expenses. Zhao Kai glanced down, but his gaze went directly to the massive, filthy stain on the hallway carpet. His expression was filled with sheer disgust. He pointed at the floor and demanded I look at what I had done to his carpet. He declared it was a handmade Persian rug worth $168,000 and asked if I could afford to pay for it. I was furious and yelled back that his dog bit me, asking how that was my fault and who told him to stand so close. Zhao Kai stared at me condescendingly, demanding $168,000, not a penny less, and asked if I was going to pay or not. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug deep into my palms, but Zhao Kai just laughed. He slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out a wad of cash, drew out a few bills, and slapped them hard right across my face. The money fluttered to the ground. He sighed, saying to forget it, and that seeing how pathetic I was, those few hundred should be enough for me to see a doctor. He nudged the carpet with the tip of his slipper, adding that I still had to pay for the carpet. He mocked that if I couldn't afford it, that was fine too, but I would have to kneel down and wipe the carpet clean. The woman behind him laughed hysterically. I silently bent down and picked up the scattered bills from the floor, one by one. The corners of Zhao Kai's mouth curled up even higher, but I didn't kneel. I folded the bills neatly and stuffed them directly back into Zhao Kai's pocket. I told him I'd pay for my own medical expenses. Turning around sharply, I limped toward the elevator. Every step I took with my left leg shot a piercing pain through my body, leaving a miserable trail of bloody footprints on the carpet. Zhao Kai flew into a rage out of total humiliation, yelling for me to stop right there and asking if I thought I could just leave. I didn't even look back. Zhao Kai immediately took out his phone and made a call. He shouted into the phone, demanding to know if it was the delivery platform, identifying himself as Black Gold VIP Zhao Kai, and ordering them to transfer him to the regional manager right that second. I reached the elevator and pressed the down button. Before the doors even opened, my phone rang first. The screen displayed the name of the station master, Lin Fan. The station master's voice was as cold as a blade, as he told me I had messed with someone I shouldn't have. I tried to explain, telling the station master that the customer's dog bit me and my leg was still hurting. He interrupted me directly, telling me to cut the crap. He explained that Zhao Kai was a Black Gold VIP of our platform and that the manager had given him the order personally. Desperately asked what the order was. He callously stated that my account was permanently banned and this month's salary was fully deducted to compensate the customer for his losses. I slumped weakly against the wall and closed my eyes. I pleaded with him, saying I ran for a whole month and that it was $4,600. He replied coldly that telling him was useless because it was decided from above. He offered me a piece of advice, telling me I couldn't afford to cross people like that. The call disconnected. I stared at the darkened phone screen without saying a word. The elevator doors opened and closed again, but I didn't step inside. I just stood there quietly, then opened my phone's memo app. Today was September 17th, Wang Qian's birthday. I had promised to take her out to dinner at a Western restaurant tonight. I had saved up for half a year for that necklace, keeping it safely tucked in my pocket all this time. I reached in and felt it. The necklace box was still there. Enduring the pain, I tore off my shirt sleeve and wrapped it tightly around the wound on my calf a few times. Then, I got on my electric bike and rushed toward the Western restaurant on the commercial street. The Mocha Night Western restaurant radiated a warm, yellow light. The moment I pushed the door open, the professional smile on the receptionist's face instantly froze. I was drenched from head to toe, my clothes stained with tomato soup, and a ragged cloth strip tied around my left pant leg. I looked exactly like someone who had just been fished out of a filthy sewer. She nervously asked if I had a reservation. I told her I did, for 7:30, under the name Wang Qian. The receptionist led me inside. As we passed a few tables, a harsh wave of whispers erupted from the surrounding guests. I pretended not to hear them. Then I turned the corner of a partition and suddenly stopped dead in my tracks. In the booth by the window, Wang Qian was dressed exquisitely. However, there was no one sitting across from her. Instead, a fat man wearing a thick gold chain was sitting closely beside her, his arm draped right over the back of her chair. He leaned close to her ear, whispering something that made Wang Qian's eyes crinkle with laughter. She giggled and told Mr. Zhou that he was so bad. I stood just 3 meters away, watching the entire scene unfold. Wang Qian saw me first. The smile on her face instantly vanished, completely replaced by a look of utter disgust. She abruptly stood up, marched over to me, and demanded to know why I was here. angrily whispering for me to look at the state of myself and asking if she hadn't explicitly told me not to. Wear my work uniform today. I explained that I had been fired from the platform and simply didn't have time to change. Wang Qian's eyes widened in disbelief. She angrily asked if I could be any more useless, mocking that I couldn't even hold down a job delivering food without getting fired. The fat man from across the table walked over holding a wine glass. He looked at me and asked Qianqian who I was. Wang Qian's face flushed red, then white. I ignored the fat man completely. Instead, I pulled the necklace box out of my pocket, opened it, and wished her a happy birthday. Wang Qian merely glanced at it. Not only did she refuse to take it, but she also looked up at the fat man and told me to leave first, saying we would talk some other time. The fat man laughed heartily, asking what other time she meant, and stared me up and down, mocking the fact that her boyfriend was just a food delivery guy. The gaze of every customer in the restaurant zeroed in on us. Wang Qian's face darkened completely. She snatched the necklace box right from my hand and, without even looking at it, tossed it straight into the nearby trash can. She spitefully asked if I really thought a cheap street stall trinket was fit for her to wear. My hand froze in midair. Wang Qian's voice grew louder. She shouted that she had had enough, telling me to look at myself. She screamed that I was soaked like a drowned rat, covered in wounds, and asked how I could expect her to stay with a nobody who couldn't even deliver food properly. She declared that we were breaking up and ordered me never to look for her again. With that, she picked up her glass of ice water from the table and threw it directly into my face. The entire room fell silent for a second before erupting into scattered, mocking laughter. I didn't lash out. I simply reached up, wiped the water from my face, picked the lemon slice off myself, and placed it calmly on the table. Giving Wang Qian and that fat man one final icy glare, I decisively turned around. With my back perfectly straight, I limped out of the restaurant. The rain had picked up again, and I didn't have a raincoat. I stood on the steps, letting the downpour wash over me for over 10 seconds before getting back on my bike and heading toward my shared rental apartment. 20 minutes later, just as I turned into the alley, I noticed something was horribly wrong. My thin blanket was spread out in a puddle, completely reduced to a soggy pile of rags. My clothes, my cup, my duffel bag, everything was thrown into the muddy water. The fat landlord was in the middle of tossing my socks into the trash can. The landlord forced a fake smile and remarked that I was back just in time. He cruelly pointed out that I had been fired, stated he didn't house freeloaders, and ordered me to move out immediately. I desperately argued that I had paid a deposit and that my lease wasn't up yet. He sneered that the deposit covered the utilities. He then pulled out the contract, tore it in half right in front of my face, and tossed it into the puddle. He mockingly asked what contract I was talking about, claimed he had never seen one, and told me to pack up and leave. The heavy iron door slammed shut. I silently crouched down, retrieving my duffel bag from the mud, and began stuffing whatever was still usable inside. Standing in the torrential rain, hugging my bag, I checked my pockets. I only had $20 left. An overnight stay at an internet cafe cost $15, which meant I'd have no money for food. I could only hug my bag and limp toward the bridge underpass. I had to make do by crashing at Grandpa Goo's place for the night. The rain showed no signs of stopping. Hugging my bag, I walked for a full 20 minutes. My left leg wound was soaking in rainwater, every step bringing a piercing, bone-deep pain. The cloth strip had long since loosened. But when I finally reached the underpass, I found Grandpa Goo's shack collapsed. Broken bamboo poles and plastic sheets flapped wildly in the wind, and all his bedding was soaked in the rain. I called out to him, but no one answered. I dug into the wreckage of the shack and pulled back the plastic sheet. It was completely empty. The old man was gone. I hurriedly rebuilt the shack as best as I could, plugging the holes with a wet t-shirt. Once I finished, I squatted inside, panting heavily. I pulled the $20 bill from my pocket. After hesitating for 2 minutes, I stood up and ran out into the rain toward the street corner. There was a noodle shop at the corner. When I rushed in, completely dripping wet, I told the boss I needed one large bowl of beef noodles to go with extra meat. It cost $18. After paying, I only had $2 left in my pocket. Smelling the rich aroma of the beef noodles, my stomach actually ached violently from hunger. Swallowing hard, I stubbornly clutched the noodles against my chest and ran all the way back. When I got back to the bridge underpass, there was someone in the shack. Grandpa Goo had returned, curled up tightly in a ball, completely wrapped in my old raincoat. I told him I bought beef noodles and urged him to eat while they were hot. No one answered. I squatted down and patted the old man's shoulder. To my touch, he was bone-chillingly cold. I quickly turned him over. Grandpa Goo's face was terrifyingly pale, his lips blackened, and his eyes tightly shut. I screamed out for him and pressed my hand against his forehead. It was burning hot. The old man's breathing was so shallow I could barely hear it. My mind went completely blank. Forgetting everything else, I shoved the food back into the bag and hoisted the old man onto my back. He was unexpectedly light. Holding onto him tightly, I limped out into the heavy rain. The wound on my left leg tore open completely, but I sped up, breaking into a frantic jog. It was a 3-street distance. Halfway there, I tripped and fell hard, but I braced myself with one hand, refusing to let the old man go. I scrambled up and continued walking, as if my life depended on it. I practically crawled and stumbled into the emergency hall of the City South Second People's Hospital. Seeing my state, the nurses immediately rushed over with a gurney. The doctors and nurses wheeled him straight toward the emergency room, and I followed closely behind. When they asked what the situation was, I explained he had a high fever and was already unconscious when I found him. The doctor gave me a sharp look, noted that I wasn't family, and pushed the gurney directly into the emergency room. I slumped against the wall, sitting on the floor. My delivery uniform was covered in mud, and my left leg was swollen massively. I looked absolutely pathetic. After waiting for 40 minutes, the doctor finally came out. I leaned against the wall to force myself upright. The doctor told me it was severe pneumonia, combined with severe dehydration, with a very high risk of heart failure. He needed to be admitted to the ICU, and the cost would be incredibly high. He asked if I could make the decision. The ICU cost at least $2,000 a day. I only had $2 in my pocket. With red eyes, I gritted my teeth and told him to treat him first, swearing I would figure out a way to get the money. At 2 a.m., Grandpa Goo was moved to the emergency observation area. Various tubes were hooked up to his body, and the ECG monitor beeped steadily. I pulled up a stool, sat by the bed, and pulled the blanket up a bit higher for him. I remembered the first time I met him 2 years ago. He was digging through a trash can eating watermelon rinds, and I had given him my dinner. After all this time, I still didn't even know his full name. I only knew he always called me Xiaofan. I heard him weakly whisper my name. I jerked my head up. Grandpa Goo had opened his eyes a crack and located my position. I quickly told him he was awake and that I'd go call the doctor immediately. Suddenly, his withered fingers grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. He begged me not to call them, his voice incredibly weak. He told me there was no tomorrow. I was gripped tightly by the old man. He stared at me, a bizarre light suddenly gleaming in his murky eyes. I gently told him I was here. He looked at me and said, "You passed." The green line on the ECG monitor spiked violently twice, followed by a long, continuous tone. A flat, steady line, his hand completely loosened. I stood up and shook the old man's hand frantically, screaming his name. Nurses rushed in and pushed me away. CPR, defibrillation. I was escorted out into the hallway. Through the glass, I couldn't hear anything anymore. All I could see was that green line, stretching out completely flat. Grandpa Goo died at 2:47 a.m. After 20 minutes of resuscitation attempts, the doctor walked out through the glass doors, pulled his mask down to his chin, and slowly shook his head. I didn't speak. I stood in the corridor, leaning firmly against the wall, staring at the cracks in the floor tiles for a long, long time. The nurse asked me to sign the papers, the death certificate, and the body disposal authorization. Since there were no other family members, the hospital could only turn to me. I signed them. My hand was shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't just grief. It was a delayed, numbing reaction, like taking a heavy blow to the head, where the pain takes a few agonizing seconds to finally reach your nerves. At dawn, I went to the morgue. Grandpa Goo was lying in a cold silver drawer. I pulled back the white sheet and looked at the old man one last time. He looked very peaceful, much better than when he was alive. I whispered, asking him what he meant by those final words, but no one answered. What came next was harder than I could have ever imagined. When a person dies, you need an urn, a cremation, and a burial plot. The absolute cheapest package added up to $2,100. But I only had $2 to my name. My wages had been confiscated by the platform, my deposit swallowed by the landlord, and the necklace thrown into the trash. I sat in the hospital hallway for an hour, scrolling through my contacts 3 separate times. I didn't have a single person I could borrow money from. I came out of an orphanage. I had no family, so I downloaded a predatory loan app, the kind with exorbitant interest rates and relentless debt collectors. I used to despise these things the most, but right now I had no choice but to try. It took 2 hours for approval. In the afternoon, $3,000 hit my account. After deducting the absurd handling fees, I received $2,700. It was enough. The funeral was on the 3rd day. It was in the most secluded corner plot of the suburban cemetery, the cheapest burial plot imaginable, with a headstone made simply of raw cement. I couldn't afford to pay for engraving, so I used a permanent marker to write, "Tomb of Gu Xinghui." I squatted on the ground, burning paper money. The flames flickered violently in the wind. I also brought that large bowl of beef noodles with extra meat, placing it carefully in front of the headstone. I told him I brought the beef noodles, noting that it was a large bowl with extra meat. Paper ashes drifted upward into the gray sky. Just then, I heard the sound of car engines approaching from behind. 2 cars drove in and parked nearby. 5 or 6 people got out. Leading them was a plump woman wearing a mink coat, followed closely by several men in sleek suits. They walked right up to me, assessing the concrete headstone. The plump woman sneered in disgust, asking if this was Gu Xinghui's grave, and remarking on how pathetic it looked. I stood up and demanded to know who they were. She proudly declared she was Gu Xinghui's niece, and pointed behind her, adding that they were all his distant relatives. I told her the old man never saw them when he was alive, asking why it was any of her business now. She violently rolled her eyes. Suddenly, she stepped forward and viciously kicked over the iron basin. The fire basin rolled away, scattering ashes everywhere. The bowl of beef noodles was also kicked over, the noodles and hot soup splattering all over the muddy ground. She stood with her hands on her hips, demanding to know where the old man's things were, his bank book, his cash. She yelled that he had collected trash his whole life, and there was no way he hadn't saved a single dime. She aggressively asked if he had ever told me where he hid his money. I stared at the ruined beef noodles on the ground and said absolutely nothing. A young man smoking a cigarette stepped forward, telling his aunt that he thought the old man really didn't have any money. He pointed at the grave, noting that even the headstone was made of concrete. He then asked me if he at least had a phone, and demanded to know his WeChat balance. I finally spoke, my voice a bit hoarse. I told them that when he passed, he only had his military coat and $3.20 in his pocket. I offered to give it to them right now if they wanted it. The plump woman stared at me for a few seconds before letting out a sharp, venomous laugh. She poked my head with a red-nailed finger, calling me an idiot. She mocked me for throwing a funeral for an old scavenger, asking if I thought I was some kind of saint, and questioned if I really thought I'd get a reward for taking care of him. The men beside her erupted into laughter. I told them to shut up. She snapped back, demanding to know what I just said. I repeated it, telling them to shut up. I turned around, glaring at them dead in the eye. I yelled that they didn't even attend his funeral, and now they came here digging through a dead man's pockets. I told them if they had even a shred of decency left, they would pick up that fire basin and bow to the old man. If not, I told them to get out. The woman's face flushed crimson. She spat viciously on the ground, declaring that being poor was just pathetic. She asked how I dared to put on airs with her, questioning what a mere delivery boy thought he was to tell her what to do. She turned on her heel and marched off, nearly slipping in the mud. The young man muttered that the place was terrible.